Hello everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. Today I want to talk about HBAR and what some of our indicators here at Upside Down Data have been making of its recent price action. So if you've been following HBAR, it's been a pretty unpleasant time in the market recently. Of course, the whole crypto market really crashed pretty hard after the whole Luna UST debacle, and HBAR was no exception, dipping all the way down to around the 4 cents level before bouncing back up to where we are right now. Now, one indicator that I like to look at to get more of an idea of the macro picture of an asset, to kind of identify what phase of the market cycle an asset might be in, is the momentum bias indicator, or the MBI. If you're not familiar, this is an indicator that indexes basically prevailing momentum in the market. So green above 0 is positive momentum bias, red is negative momentum bias. 0 here is the average amount of momentum in the asset, and obviously with HBAR that's positive because HBAR has been trending up over time. And then the values are standard deviations, so one standard deviation above the mean, one standard deviation below the mean. And the nice thing about the MBI, or what I like about it, is that it shows particular types of behavior in different times of the market cycle. So in bullish phases, so kind of these overall uptrends, it spends a lot more time up in the green than it does down in the red. And this is not just true for HBAR, it's true for Bitcoin and, a bunch of different other assets that we've looked at with the MBI, that this is kind of a signature of a bull market that's spending a lot of time in the positives and then quickly being able to bounce back up out of negatives and not really have to spending more time in the green than the red, basically. And that's what we really saw kind of in this whole run. It's up to this local high point here. In early 21, where we just went on this big run, and a lot of the time was spent up in the green. And the times when the negative momentum bias took over were quickly reversed, and then it was positive momentum bias regime. Had a dip down here for the summer, but then quickly again reestablished positive momentum bias, rode that through the high, but then flipped red. And what we've been seeing more recently is very much a signature of a bear market. We've seen this with Bitcoin all the time, where it'll spend a lot of time in the red during a bear market. You'll see these little peaks above 0, trying to pop up, the bulls are trying to reestablish a positive momentum bias, but then it quickly gets rejected and then it goes back down to the downside. So this is very much a bearish structure in the MBI. So that kind of describes where we are, and I don't think it's any surprise. Obviously we've been in a bear market. I think the question everyone's asking is, okay, what can we look for to maybe see some signs of relief or to get some hope? And really with the MBI, the first thing to look for is, can we reestablish a positive momentum bias? And not just immediately getting rejected like we did over here, but actually start to spend some reasonable time up in the green zone. And that might be a suggestion that a more bullish footing is coming back. But really what we're seeing right now is a bearish situation. Until we can do that, from the MBI's perspective, there's only limited amount of optimism we can have, or until we can really do that, the MBI doesn't think that it makes much sense to be especially bullish. So obviously that's not to say that we can't get back up and reestablish that in short order. I think a lot of it's going to depend on what happens with the broader crypto markets. If the broader market gets more bullish, I see no reason why HBAR won't also get more bullish, be able to start moving back to the upside. But certainly this right now is not being all that positive. Really, we'd like to see this flip green before we can start feeling more bullish about where HBAR is heading. Now, another indicator that we like to look at on this channel is the Trend Confidence Indicator, or TCI. So this is trying to get at something different than the MBI. So the MBI is about momentum. TCI is really trying to give us ideas about how confident we can be in a given trend. So 0 is the dividing line between bearishness and bearishness and bullishness. So if you're above 0 and you're in an uptrend, that means you can be relatively confident in that uptrend continuing. But if you're in an uptrend like we had here, then the TCI flips red, that would be concerning. That would be suggesting that this uptrend is likely to be ending, exactly what we saw, moving to the downside. And then likewise, if you're in a downtrend and then the TCI flips green, that can suggest that upside is likely to follow. That's what we saw in the summer of 21, and indeed upside followed right after. So the TCI is designed to be a leading indicator. You'll see that it actually flipped green in the summer before we hit the actual bottom. And back here in 21, early 21, you'll see that it flipped red before we actually started really this massive crash. It's supposed to give as early of a warning sign as it can, or as is feasible, that a trend reversal is coming. You know, it does its best job basically to give an early warning sign, and it's done that, you know, for HBAR pretty well. Other assets, it also shows its behavior, you know, Bitcoin, etc. So more recently, what we've seen has been in this downtrend, and kind of throughout this phase here, as we kind of started to plateau out, maybe starting to try to build out a base before moving back up, kind of more or less sideways action through here. You see that it had been really starting to show some more indecision. You know, the indecision started here, really started to pick up here, and then I thought that maybe this was it. Maybe we're going to get a relief rally here, popping all the way up around this one level over here. But then, of course, the whole Luna UST debacle happened, and then we crashed to the downside. So in an alternate universe, maybe this would have been a relief rally, but, you know, extraneous factors interfered, and then, you know, the TCI was like, all right, that was invalidated, and then it called that invalidation very quickly, you know, basically right around here, before that massive sell-off to the downside. So where we are right now, you'll see we put in this bottom here. We started to track a course back towards that neutral point. But the critical price level it's looking for, you know, one of the nice things with this model is we can probe it to ask it what price level it's looking at before it'll flip bullish again. It's looking at 11 cents. So higher than we are right now. You know, last I looked, we were at around 8 cents that we were trading at. So some work that would have to be done to reclaim that, but not impossible. And so should HBAR start showing some strength, reclaim that level, then the TCI would think that maybe that trend, maybe that would start looking like a more believable uptrend, especially if we can continue clearing up beyond that. So something to keep an eye on. And this is a dynamic, this is a dynamic level. This will be changing over time. And so if price keeps falling, or even if we just keep consolidating in this area, this might come down towards it, closer to it, making it easier for, you know, an uptrend to become more believable. But time will tell if that'll happen. But this is where we are right now. For now, a believable downtrend. The TCI does not see any reason right now to be especially optimistic of this immediately reversing to the upside. But that's just what it's seeing. You know, obviously anything can happen in crypto. So the final indicator I wanted to mention as well was the market direction classifier, or MDC. This is a newer indicator that we launched on this channel. And really my motivation in designing this was trying to get something that can capture kind of broader moves. So like kind of broader, more bullish times, bearish times, you know, bullish times, you know, look at this big move up here, bearish times, bullish times, bearish times, etc. And really my idea of using this is that you might use it in conjunction with something like the TCI, where the TCI might be giving you kind of the early warning signs, like for example back here, giving early warning sign that this was likely to fall off, or that this was about to reverse, and then use the MDC as a confirmation signal to that. Is one way that you could consider thinking about it. Not financial advice, just one way that I've thought about using how this indicator can fit with something like the TCI. And nice thing about this indicator as well is we can also probe it for critical price levels. It's currently watching the 18-cent level before it will flip more bullish. So again, you know, being a little bit more patient of a model than something like the TCI, that's looking at 11 cents. MDC is looking for 18 cents. So what's my overall takeaways from these different indicators? Well, I think across the board, we can see that we're definitely still in bearish footing, you know, across all of these indicators. But, you know, obviously that doesn't mean that we have to continue down to the downside. You know, this could very well be the bottom. I really think it's going to depend on what happens with Bitcoin. Because again, if Bitcoin nukes down to 20K, I see no reason why HBAR wouldn't also fall with it. I think, you know, altcoins tend to be punished very heavily when Bitcoin has massive drops to the downside. Personally, I don't see why HBAR would be the lone standing asset that wouldn't show that same type of behavior we see with all altcoins these times. But I think really with these bearish conditions, the thing to keep in mind is what are the fundamentals, what are the thesis for it, right? Because, you know, if the asset has really strong fundamentals, if there's a lot of building that'll happen in the bear market, you know, in some ways the bottom doesn't really matter if you think that ultimately it's going to go and put on all-time highs. So I think personally what I'm doing, or what I'm thinking about with any altcoin that I might consider being, you know, continue to be invested in a bear market is, you know, is that thesis there for that long-term horizon? If it is, then in some ways you can almost think of a lot of this as just being noise before some ultimate move back to the upside in the next bull market. But that's, again, up to everyone to make their own mind of is the thesis intact. And I do think it's important to pay attention to that, to not just assume one way or the other, to really kind of look at things more carefully and think about if you see it being intact. You know, in my opinion, HBAR has a lot of fundamental value in its technology, certainly, with a novel consensus algorithm that has a lot of potential for scalability and things like that. But then we're also going to have to watch things like adoption, things like that, which are not so much in the technology's hands, but just, you know, some other things that can feed into that. Will HBAR actually get adopted and used by a lot of people? That could, if that does happen, if there's a lot of building that happens on HBAR and a lot of people end up using it, that could really set it up well for the next bull market, where there's a lot of intrinsic value in it already. Then as all the capital inflows, a lot of it could find its way into the HBAR ecosystem, and that could end up being a big catalyst. But again, that requires that building to happen. So one of the things I'm personally going to be watching very closely with HBAR is, does adoption continue? Does development continue and hopefully accelerate in the bear market? Really kind of a lot of building. You know, this happened with Ethereum in the bear market in 2018, 2019. You know, Ethereum dropped 90% into that bear market, but then there was just so much building and development that happened with Ethereum that then there was a huge explosion of growth that happened, and, you know, Ethereum cleared off to, you know, set in very nice all-time highs, well above the previous all-time high, and, you know, catalyzed a development of a massive ecosystem that still dominates, you know, the layer one space today. And, you know, I think it's unrealistic to think HBAR could have that much of a success story given how many other competitors there are out there, but can at least capture a decent market share or carve out its own niche in, for example, the more business side of things, the enterprise side of things, etc. Some things to keep in mind that I'm keeping in mind as I evaluate this. Now, finally, the other thing I did just want to mention with HBAR, and I think this applies to any altcoin. You know, altcoins are risky inherently. They're always going to be more risky than something like Bitcoin. They're going to have more volatility. They're smaller market caps. So you'll see a lot of people trying to call the bottom. And especially within altcoins, you'll see a lot of people trying to say, you know, this is the bottom for HBAR. And basically try to get the sentiment out there that there's almost FOMO, that people will wanting to be piling into the asset, fearing that they're going to be missing the bottom. Personally, I think that it's kind of silly to be trying to time the bottom for any asset, especially an altcoin, because so much of its price action is outside of its hands, right? So much of it depends on what Bitcoin's doing, if the broader markets are crashing, et cetera, et cetera. But trying to call the absolute bottom for HBAR, I think, is going to be incredibly hard. And that's why I'm not going to try to call the absolute bottom. For me personally, what I'm going to be looking for is, when does the trend look like it's reversing, right? When does the TCI flip bullish? When does the MDC flip bullish, for example? Because, you know, even if you miss the absolute bottom, you know, if let's say you're not buying here, but you're buying here, does it really matter that much in the future? You know, you're really going to look back and be like, oh man, I really wish I would have bought here if you bought here. Probably not. And frankly, you know, I think there's just a lot more peace of mind of not, you know, worrying that you're catching a falling knife, that, you know, you might see a 50% drop to the downside before upside could happen, by just waiting until you get more bullish signs before buying. So not financial advice, you should make your own decisions about how to navigate that. But that's just one of the things that I'm thinking about, is that with an altcoin in a bear market, there's just so much downside that is possible, that for me personally, I think, you know, I'd like to see the asset showing some signs of bullishness, signs of an uptrend, before getting too excited. But again, you should make your own decisions on how to navigate that. But that's just one of the things that I'm looking for. Are some of these indicators? Is the MBI going to flip bullish? TCI going to flip bullish? MDC going to flip bullish? If those things start happening and the broader markets are getting more bullish, then I think we could be setting ourselves up for a very nice leg back up to the upside with something like HBAR, really start to reclaim some of this ground that's lost. Wouldn't mean we have to go set a new all-time high, but maybe we'll just start clawing back some of this ground that we've been losing in this really nasty downtrend. But again, there's no way of knowing exactly when that might happen. And so really what I'm just going to be waiting patiently to see is when that does happen. And then again, if those fundamentals continue to build as well, and then we start to see those trends, so those things happening, and especially then if we enter into a more broader bullish phase in the market, that could be kind of the building blocks for a big move to the upside. Because what you're going to get to at some point with these altcoins is a point where a lot of the people who are going to sell are going to sell. And then that can set up that kind of foundation for the next bull market. All right, if you like the content, remember to subscribe to the channel, give the video a like, and follow us on Twitter. But a lot of updates about our indicators and more over there.